Um, Hi, good morning. This is Pawan Srinath, and welcome to the third State Matter live stream tutorial. I have my colleague Pranay with me. Um, uh, First off, we are sorry that we've not been able to do this a little sooner, but later is better, still better than never. So while I guess 90% of the state budgets have, we still have a few pending. And while the budgets have come out, as expected from last year, there's been a limited amount of analysis in the public space, which is what we are trying to change. We've already had some great articles come out from members of this campaign, and we are hoping for a lot more and a lot deeper articles in the coming weeks. So first off, I'd like to take a few moments to recap all that's happened so far. Um, so when we started looking at state budgets, the initial document that you need to sort of look at is the annual financial statement. So I think in our past tutorials, we walked through the annual financial statement. How do you look at budget numbers? How do you compare this year versus last year? How do you look at trends? And how do you look at sort of the discovered priorities or the revealed priorities based on looking at the budget numbers as opposed to looking at the budget speech? So before we go further today, where we'll dive deeper and on how do you look at, say, one particular sector, right? You want to look at, say, water supply and sanitation and dive in and see how a particular scheme is working or how a particular component of it is working, how well the expenditure is happening, and so on. We'll take a few steps back, right? So working with numbers can be quite scary. Working with budgets can be very overwhelming. But whenever we do budget analysis, it's important to remember where we are coming from. And so I think all budget analysis has to actually start from you asking yourself, what does really need to spend more on, right? So you come from a subjective and a personal analysis of what you think are the state's priorities, what you think should be opportunities that are unique to the state or that the state has a comparative advantage in, that which the state can exploit, and what are the specific pressing concerns that the state has to find short-term and long-term solutions to. Right? So if so, for example, the newly formed state of Andhra Pradesh does not have much of a tax base, is not very urbanized, and has a whole set of challenges of being a new state, right? So its challenges are quite unique. The opportunities, again, are that they may be able to do things in a new slate and be able to do things that other states may not be able to do, right? So there are opportunities and special concerns for a state like Andhra. Each one of our states is going through some trouble or the other each time, be it agricultural failure, a lack of urbanization, a challenge with power, which I think Pranay will spend some more time on, or many other challenges, right? So it's important to look at this first and then come to the budget document and say, okay, now do the revealed priorities of the budget match these concerns that you have brought up? Are the concerns addressed by the budget also legitimate, or what, right? And then I think the stories start getting formed. And apart from that, while I think in the past tutorials we've sort of warned our participants from getting swayed entirely by the budget speech, because a lot of it is left out of the budget speech, it's still important to start there, right? So while the budgets are coming out, please go look at last year's budget speech by your finance minister or finance secretary, and look at this year's budget speech and see how the verbal emphasis between the budget speeches have changed. And then if those are also reflected in the deeper budget documents and the analysis that you do. So it's important to do this first and then go there. And I'm hoping that for the remaining budgets, we'll have our participants do more live tweeting and live explanations to the public on what really is happening, right? one final note before I sort of hand it over to Pranay, who will be walking you through an exercise. Today is the Karnataka budget. I think the speech will be out in a few hours. So do expect a set of live tweets and explainers on what's happening and more analysis in the next a few days. I think we have a big quorum of people who will be analyzing the Karnataka budget. So hang on for that. Pranay, what other budgets are out this week that we'll be seeing some activity on? Sorry, Pranay, I think your mic was on mute.
Yeah, Maharashtra will be out, and so will be, Andhra Pradesh budget analysis will also be out.
Maharashtra will be out on the 18th.
18th.
3 days from now. So, folks, before the budget's out, it's good to get a pre-budget piece out on what you think should be the priorities of the Maharashtra budget. Andhra should be out when, Pranay? I think there's been some most confusion on the Andhra Pradesh budget till date.
I think it will be out this week. That's all I can say with reasonable certainty.
Right, and Telangana is already out. So get cracking, folks. So, Pranay, anything else that you want to add before you dive in?
No, I think we are good.
Okay, so tell our participants a little more about what you'll be doing next.
Yeah, so first let me share my screen.
Sure. While Pranay is sharing his screen, okay, I think Pranay pretty much started. Go to him.
Good. Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, Pavan, go ahead. You were saying something.
I think one of the, as we sort of expected, I think early in the campaign, one of the big challenges with the state budget is that it's still reasonably arbitrary as to when each state presents its budget, right? So one of the things I think is to look at is a set of analysis on how do you make the state budgets more accessible and friendly, and how do you make the state budget process more accessible and friendly, such that it is amenable to more analysis, more commentary, more discussion, and so on. Maybe one of the things is at least the union budget, the budget dates are announced at least 1 month in advance. So that's one measure of how certain, of how much certainty there is around the budget making process. Right. So, of course, states have it a little harder because they have to make their budgets sort of keeping in mind what the union budget does, and which is why we see a set of complications this year. But I would encourage all of our participants who've been trying to do this, right, trying to analyze budgets and maybe getting stuck in many places, to sort of say, what are 5 things that could change to make budget analysis easier, right? Just in the process, maybe also in the transparency of the documents that is available, the kind of detail and the kind of formatting. After Pranay is done, I'm going to walk you through a few different budget documents and see how the formats are different yet contain the same information. And we can always discuss later on how do you make this more reader friendly, more accessible, while retaining all the existing functionality of the budgets. That was pretty much what I wanted to say, Pranay. Over to you.
Okay, good morning everyone. So let's get started. So today is what I am going to discuss. The motivation is this, okay? So imagine that you want to dive into one particular sector that you are interested in. Maybe you are interested in power, or maybe you are interested in water supply in your state. It can be any topic that interests you, and probably it is one of the pressing areas of concern in your particular state. So now the motivation here is, suppose you want to deep dive into this, what does the budget say about this particular sector? So how do you go about analyzing that from the budget documents of this year? That is what we are going to discuss. Okay. So that's the motivation. The tools required for this particular type of a sectoral analysis study would be not just the annual financial statement, which I am sure you have mastered by now, but we'll go beyond the annual financial statement, because you will need to deep dive into the expenditure documents. So I'll show you what I did for one particular case, but remember this, that you will have to open more budget documents apart from the annual financial statements, specifically documents which talk about the sector that you're interested in. Where they'll be found, we'll discuss later. The third document that you would require is the budget speech itself, because as Pawan already said, you would want to begin with the budget speech and at least see what is the stated priorities upfront in that particular sector by the finance minister. Okay, so that was the motivation and the tools required. And now I'll get started with what I did for a particular case. Okay, so now one thing that I was interested in last year was the power scenario in Karnataka, because we were facing a lot of frequent power cuts. Not only in, Bangalore was still much better, but in the rural areas and in northern Karnataka, there were severe power cuts. So I wanted to look at what is the Karnataka state government doing about it. Okay? And I also knew, the background was, I knew that the problem no longer exists on the generation side in India. There is excessive capacity anyways, excessive unutilized capacity rather. And the main problem was discoms and distribution not happening, or procurement not happening of that generated power. Okay, and that's why utilization of plant utilization factors of gencos were very less. So I knew that as the background, and I wanted to investigate more. Another thing that I actually, it was a funny thing which happened was that while the budget speech was being given in the state assembly, the power went off, and the CM had to read the budget speech through mobile torch and later in candlelight for some time. Okay, so this was the background. It really interested me, and I wanted to write a piece on it. So how do you go about doing it, right? So one thing that you would do first is, what you see on the screen right away is the budget speech. Okay, so I open the budget speech and then I search for energy, because energy is one of the heads in the annual financial statement, right? So I search for energy and I end up here. So I try to see what are the type of things that the finance minister is announcing this year, right? So there are a couple of new generation schemes which are announced, like there is a new plant which they want to begin work on called Yermaras, some 800 megawatts, etc., right? So, and then they are starting a gas-based power plant at Yelhanka. Some other things at Gulbarga, Tumkur, etc. Okay, so I know that this is capital expenditure which is going to come up in this particular year on energy sector. Okay? So now I want to find out whether this is reflected in the budget document as well. Now remember, sometimes you might not find the exact names, the detail might not be right up to that level. So you have to do certain level of estimation, or you want to at least put up that this might be the type of expenditure that is being incurred. So I went through this budget speech and I knew that, okay, there are a bunch of capital expenditure that is going to come on energy sector. Okay, so that was what I got from the budget speech. Now let's go to the annual financial statement. Okay? So you can see the annual financial statement, right? So now I want to check what are the expenditures for energy. So I hope you are able to see my screens. Yeah. So
screen, so I think you should be set.
Visible now, Pawan?
Yes, totally. Please go ahead.
Okay, so now you see, I wanted to search for energy in the annual financial statement. Okay, so I search for energy, or I even know the major head which is called 2801. So I come to power sector. Okay, and I see that this is a revenue expenditure, and there is some increase over the last year, but it has dropped down in the 2016-17 budget estimate by a small amount. Okay, so from this number to, so there's some 3-4% drop. Okay, and then you see there is some more expenditure which was going to be incurred on new and renewable energy. So between 2015-16 budget estimate to revised estimate, there was a big jump. And then in the 2016-17 budgeted estimate, the number has again gone down significantly. Okay, so this was about the revenue expenditure. But as I said, I saw a lot of expenditure which seemed to be on the capital side, right? So let's go to the capital expenditure section. So I will search for 4801 with this capital outlay on power projects. So if you see here, there's a big variation here. Right? So if you see in the budgeted estimate of 2015-16, the expenditure was only 22 lakhs. Okay, that's an extremely small number, and it suddenly increased to 82,722 lakhs. And then this year it is again gone down to 6,138 lakhs. So now this is a story to tell, right? Like, why is the expenditure changing so much? What can we identify? What is this? What is the reason for this variation? And what are these expenditure being put to use for? So these were the questions. Now, annual financial statement can't give you any of these answers. So as I said, you need to bring out the third tool for analyzing this, which is the expenditure volumes. Okay. So now, how do you do that? One small background before I go there. So what you see on my screen now is one schema. Okay. So any expenditure which is given in a particular budget detailed document, the demand for grants will be uniquely numbered. Okay, uniquely numbered using this code. So it's a hierarchical code. There is first number will be major head, followed by sub major head, minor head, sub minor head, detailing head, and object head. These are the 6 levels which they've used to code a particular expenditure. Now, what you see in the annual financial statement is just the first part, which is called the major head. Now, this major head remains the same across state documents. Now it is standardized, which means that irrespective of whether you can read what is written in Hindi, if it's only written in Hindi in a particular budget document, you can be reasonably sure that if it is 4801, it will always be capital outlay on power projects. If the major head is 4801, it is always capital outlay on power projects. If it is 2210, it is always revenue expenditure on public health. So, so that major head is standardized. So it is the case with sub major head and minor head. Until these levels, the budget documents are irrespective of their layouts. This standardization has happened. Okay, so it is a savior for all of us doing the analysis. Beyond this, on the sub minor head, detailed head, and object head, there might be changes. So the standardization hasn't happened to that level. Another thing, if you're as we discussed earlier, some budget documents are only in Hindi. So for that, the equivalent names are Mukhya Sheersh, Up Mukhya Sheersh, Laghu Sheersh, and Upsheersh for major head, sub major head, minor head, and sub minor head respectively. Okay, so you might want to just note this down somewhere before beginning this deep dive. Okay, so now let's go back. Now, after this annual financial statement, I go to this particular. So this is the place on the Karnataka budget website where they where they give detailed budget estimates for expenditure. So this is departmental expenditure, you may call it. It is classified according to various functions of the state government. So as you can see, there is a volume 1 which has for finance, DPAR, home and transport, so on and so forth, right? So any of these areas that you are interested in, you have to deep dive with this particular PDF. So now so some of you might be interested in health and family welfare. It is present here. Education is here in the volume 2, etc. Now let's go to the thing that I was interested in. So energy, I see energy as part of volume 7, and there's a PDF here. There will be something similar in your state budget documents as well. Okay? So now I open this. I had already opened it, so I'll directly go there. So this looks something like this. Okay, so it is a detailed estimation of each of those things that we saw in the annual financial statement. So now I directly jump to 2801 power. So let me just start from the beginning. Okay, so it starts here. Okay, so I'll wait for the screen to pause. Okay, so if you go here, there is first I'm starting with the revenue expenditure, and I see it
Pranay,
begins. Yeah.
it might help if you can zoom in a little more so that participants who are there logged in on a smaller screen resolution are able to also see.
Yeah, I have maximized it now.
Okay.
Okay, so now you want to begin with 2801 major head, which is for power. Okay, so see how this looks. Now the way it is given here is for 2801 there is one sub major head which is named 8, which is titled 80 in general. It is that is how they've called it, and then they have given the total expenditure under this as this particular number, right? Grand total 672300, so on and so forth. This is the particular number that you would find, the grand total which is mentioned here, that you would have found in the annual financial statement. So at the top level, they have just given what they have just repeated what is already there in the annual financial statement. Now, in the next level, they deep dive into what this number is. So, for example, you see here this 80, which is the sub major head general, that is further divided into two parts. There is a minor head called 101 and said assistance to electricity boards, and then there is some 800 which says other expenditure. Now you can again see that the assistance to electricity board is the major chunk of the total expenditure. So this is where you want to deep dive in. Okay, so a major expenditure is happening on assistance to electricity board. So if there is any change in the revenue expenditure, it is most likely because of changes here. So now can we deep dive further into assistance of electricity boards? For that, I try to go to the next page, and I see that there is after minor head they have given more details, right? So it's not just assistance to electricity board. Within that they have given one. So it is a detailed head which is called Assistance to Electricity Board and Karnataka Electricity Board, and then you see a big component which is called subsidies. So this is the major component. It is almost 95% of the total expenditure on revenue expenditure on power sector, and you see this one, right? 2801 80 10114. That is the titling that I was talking to you about. 2801 is the major head, sub major head, minor head, etc. Okay, so that is how they've given it in this particular expenditure statement. So now you see that subsidies were increasing from 2014 to 2015-16. They increased, and then in 2016-17 they have perhaps reduced the subsidies, right? So this is one thing that you can say about power sector, that in fact the biggest subsidy given by the Karnataka government to its resident is subsidy for power. Okay? So this is the story that I could tell, that they were increasing subsidies, but this year they have sort of reduced a bit on it. And anyways, as you know, the big problem is that we are not paying enough for our power, and that leads to poor outcomes in terms of unreliable power. So that was one story that I could tell based on this. So that was on the revenue side. Now the other part was the 2810, the new and renewable energy part. But here the detailed weren't good enough for me to write a nice story, right? Because most of the things were given blank for some reason. So you see here they've not put any expenditure here. So I couldn't write a story based on that. I have not investigated the revenue expenditure on renewable energy in greater detail. Okay? So you might encounter something like that in your document as well. That's why I want to highlight. Just move on. Just see if there's anything else that you can tell. So then I go to the capital outlay, right, which I was interested in. Now in capital outlay, directly I see there is one sub-major head which is called hydel generation. Now again, hydel generation is makes up almost 100% of the expenditure capital outlay on power project, and that is where the big variation is. So hydel power generation was suddenly increased in the revised estimate, and then it has again been pulled down here. So I want to dive deeper into what is the expenditure here. So I go into the hydel power generation. The next level is again given here. You deep dive into hydel generation. It says there is a big investment in public sector and other undertakings. So in Karnataka's case, I think they generally have a fund which they put money into for investing into capital projects on power. So that is what this money is going into. So you could make that out from here. And beyond that, if you go, so at the next level, again, hydel generation, they have given more details for investment in public sector and other undertakings. So if you go here, the big expenditure item within this particular minor head is again investment. Okay, so you see investment in a particular project, that composes the big chunk here. So now I wanted to look at, okay, where could this investment have gone to? So I know it is for hydel generation and I know it is for capital. So, but there is no more detail given here. The projects have not been specified, etc. That's where the budget speech comes to the aid. You go to the budget speech, and budget speech had mentioned something like we are going to start new projects in Gulbarga, or we are going to start new projects elsewhere. So I assessment that probably this expenditure is going for these 3 or 4 hydel power project schemes, and that's why the variation over the particular years. Okay. So that was what I did, and then based on understanding, I wrote a piece on Times of India, which is a short 500-word piece on the day of the budget. So it's not very detailed, but whatever I could investigate from these 3 documents that I showed to you, I could make certain claims. Okay. So as I said, I could first I highlighted how the capital expenditure varies a lot, and then I could say that the increase in expenditure in the last year seen was due to hydel power generation, which I saw from the budget, and I said that possibly it was for the 3 projects which were mentioned in the budget speech. Okay, so this is the name. These are the names here. Then I said on the revenue expenditure on how there is a decrease in the spending, and which is the decrease has happened because the subsidies have been reduced. And then towards the end, I ended with how subsidies to inefficient discoms need to be reduced, and that is the prudent approach to take. Okay, so this is a very simple example of what you can do in sectoral analysis. Now you might want to dive deeper and write much better pieces on this, but this is how you can get started. Okay, so start with the budget speech, go to the annual financial statement, see the particular expenditure item, and then deep dive into the expenditure volumes, and then see whether you can make out where the changes have happened, and then compare it again with the budget speech. Okay, so that's all I had. If there are any questions, we can discuss that towards the end. Okay. Pawan, that's all I had.
All right. Thanks so
Hello?
much, Pranay. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much, Pranay. So so Pranay took you through a deep dive, right, of how do you actually try and investigate one line of questioning. Before I go on to the next section, I want to sort of walk you through, sorry, sort of take some of the questions that have been coming our way. The first question comes from Krishna Panyam on, what is the V and C, I think, that he noted in some of the budget documents. So you will be seeing this in all budget documents. There is something called voted and something called charged expenditures in the budget. What this really means is that there are certain types of expenditure incurred by the state government that technically cannot be voted on by the state assembly. For example, you're spending money on the High Court and on the salaries of the judges of the courts in your state. So, given the independence of the judiciary, technically one can't, the assembly does not have the right to vote on this. So this is something that is charged on the exchequer and not necessarily voted on. Frankly, for the purposes of analysis, the difference between voted and charged is not relevant, I think. I mean, usually, if you're looking very carefully at individual things, what it means is that the assembly may not have direct control over the salaries of the High Court. Quasi-judicial bodies like the State Information Commission, the State Information Commissioner may be able to set his or her own salary or have a different mechanism from a different law which sets salaries and emoluments and things like that. And essentially because you don't want to have complete control of the judiciary by the legislature. So that's where the difference comes from. Typically, the charged expenditure, when you look at the whole thing, might be less than 1%. I'm just pulling that number out of my head. So in general, it's not something that is very important. Okay, but it's an important nuance. I guess it's an interesting nuance to be aware of. Okay. So now let me go ahead and sort of go back to what Pranay was saying and give you a few examples of how different budgets can look different and how you should be looking for the same things in all of them. So I think I'm presenting now. I think what I shall do is I shall go ahead and share my screen here. And I think that should help. Okay. So what I want to do is, do a very quick dive of how do you look at these deep dive expenditure documents, and the way Pranay did with the power sector in Karnataka. I'm going to keep this very simple. So, for example, I've just opened the Haryana Budget website, and so in the budget website you have being the demand for grants with the detailed estimates of expenditure, right? So Haryana Budget has just given one document which has all of this, and I go to that here, and this is what I get. So basically, like Pranay said, in the Karnataka budget, there were about 10-20 documents, of which one, I think, budget document 7, the 7th volume had the energy sector and so on. It seems to be a little different in the case of Haryana. There's only one such document. And as you can see, this has an entire list of subjects and the pages they are in. Right? So as you can tell here, again, you have the major heads that appear first. So let's see if we can find, if I'm looking for, say, the major head on health. Right? So find 2210 medical health, and then you dive right into medical health. Right? So if I go to the right page, I hope you are able to see this. This is what I get. Now, again, on the face of it, this looks quite a bit different from what the Karnataka budget document looks like, but you can sort of start telling that you will find the same information in a slightly different format, right? So you have 2210 on top, that's medical and public health. You can see that a small amount here is still charged. It might be for a couple of employees somewhere or some particular type of expenditure. And what you see below is this. Again, you see the high level summary first, which only looks at the minor heads and the subheads. So basically the subhead here is 101, right? So it's 221001 being urban health services allopathy. Under 01, there is 001, which is direction and administration. And as you can tell, this is the one which is charged. So for some reason, apart from the judiciary, this direction and administration is charged instead of voted, and the rest of it remains voted, right? So you have 1001, 102, 109 being employee state insurance, school health scheme, hospitals and dispensaries, and assistance to non-government institutions, right? So you have that. You have 02 urban health services, other systems of medicine, rural health services, um, medical education and training, and public health. So here, right here, sometimes you can get the information that you're looking for, where you might want to say that, hey, I just want to care about the Ayurveda budget in my state, and seeing uh, if the minister is saying that they are promoting Ayurveda, what are they really doing, right? So you will get the high level numbers in somewhere here, but even here, like you can see, there might be an Ayurveda number in medical education and training, another in, rural health services, other systems of medicine, and so on, right? So even something like Ayurveda might come several times. And, you can also tell that it might be just a tiny fraction compared to the modern medicine health services that are being provided in the form of primary health centers, community health centers, and so on by the government, right? So, so that is something that you can get right here. But often you might find something like, say you're interested in urban health services provided by the government, right? It says urban health services allopathy, urban health services, other systems of medicine, but you really don't have much of an idea of what is going on, except knowing that 110 hospitals and dispensaries seems to have a number like, I think this is about 643 crores in the Haryana government, by the Haryana government, and you really want to know what it's spent on, right? So you may not actually analyze what is there below this level of detail, but you would want to know what's in it, so that you can classify it and use it properly. So again, in this particular budget document, it goes through all the things up to the minor head level. It ends here, and then starts the next level of detail, right? So you go back to 2210, you go back to 01 urban health services, and now this will be going into a much higher level of detail, and that is something that you'll be able to see here. If you can see what I'm highlighting, so that's major head 2210, 01 being urban health services, 001 below that, and then the more specific heads that come under that can go all the way till salaries of various sorts. You can get actual dearness allowance and travel expenses, and you can actually get lost in this level of detail, because this will keep coming again and again for every single place where there are employees. So this is something that you will have to take a look at, and sort of be capable and be able to not get overwhelmed by this. So that this is all there, but you can more or less ignore it and then go forward. And so the point I'm trying to make is that you will sort of get a sense of the detail, but you will get so much detail that you can get overwhelmed. So just keep paying attention to just the one level detail below what you got in the previous section, which is, under direction and administration, one unit is, strengthening of the health directorate. Okay, this may not be important to you, but that's one level of detail. 98. So this number is what you're looking for. There's a district staff and so on. So once you actually get to the hospital side, which will take quite a while to get to, you will be able to see what actually comes within hospitals and dispensaries, how it is split up, maybe Haryana government might actually list 10 hospitals it is funding, and so on, right? And you can get some hints of those things over here. Like there's an actual grant in aid to the Haryana Red Cross blood donation services. There's something to an ambulance association, and so on, right? So actually start getting specific details. So if you're actually curious about, how a medical college in your city is funded, if you think this medical college is doing well and can do much better for the city, you can actually go down and see its budget details right here. So I'm trying, and below that you might again get salaries and all those details which you might ignore, but you will get the high level numbers you're looking for. And even when you don't want the number, you will get the subunits that are relevant to you telling your larger story. Okay, so I'm showing this not because I have a story here like Pranay, but just to show you that the Haryana budget looks very different from the Karnataka budget, but it is having the exact same information, right? And we are just looking at the heads now. If I scroll across, yeah, you have actual budget estimates, revised, and the latest year's estimates, right? And what you have to be very, very careful of is the units. So in Haryana budget, if I'm not mistaken, at the previous level, you had numbers which were in the thousands. I think at this level, you have actual numbers. So I think this is actually 3,35,000 rupees, right? So your units have changed to rupees. So this is something that you'll always have to pay attention to. If you get your numbers wrong, then nothing else is usually very doable or feasible. Okay, so the next thing, I just want to sort of see if I can show you this from a different state as well. While the major heads of all states are objective, they are exactly the same across all states, the major heads are often clustered into different demand for grants, right? So within the overall expenditure, this is Tamil Nadu, you have different demands for grants. So Tamil Nadu can say that I will bunch up my expenditure in the way that my departmental administration is structured, right? So in Tamil Nadu, for example, you have a demand for grant for municipal administration and water supply. In Karnataka, for example, there will be separate demands for grants under urban development and water supply and sanitation, right? So this is purely subjective, and it depends on how the state has decided to organize its departments and sub-departments. However, the major heads and minor heads remain the same. So one of the things that can happen in your state, which can complicate your life, is that your major head can end up coming in multiple demands for grants. Okay, so what that means is urban development might come under 34. So urban development, if I'm not mistaken, is a head called 2217. That might come under municipal administration and water supply. It might also come somewhere else. Okay, so it's important for you. It might also come here in 26, which is housing and urban development, right? So if you want to look at urban development, you will have to look at both bits together. And that's an extra level of complication that you will have to manage. And then you can look at that sheet and see if this is what level of details you can get below it. Okay, so again, now the Tamil Nadu document looks very different. By the way, some documents are A4 pages that run one after the other. Some budget documents are actually A3 sheets split into A4. So you will have to do some funny things with aligning them in the right way before you can start reading them. Okay, so I just wanted to sort of tell you that while there is this diversity, the information is the same, and there are some complications that you will have to jump over when you are trying to do analysis. So I want to pause here again to see if people have any questions, and if maybe Pranay wants to intervene before we go on to the next thing. Pranay?
No, nothing. Nothing from my end, Pawan. I didn't see any questions. I'm just looking at the...
Okay. Yeah, I know that we sort of announced this last minute, and this is at a bad time. So I'm guessing that the number of live people attending this webinar are few, but I'm hoping that Mo will be able to get to this later in the day. So we're always happy to field questions later on over WhatsApp or email. So one final thing that I'm not going to spend too much time on, but walk you all through is looking at budget reclassification. Right. So all of you now, I'm sure, have become familiar with the annual financial statements at least. So I'm just going to go back and open the Karnataka financial statement. In the annual financial statement, you get all these details, right? You get all these major heads. You have all these things that are classified as general services and social services and so on. But as we sort of discussed in the first or second tutorial, sometimes there's not enough meaning in how governments classify and bucket their expenditure. So this is an attempt to reclassify the government expenditure in a way that we think has a little more meaning. Okay. So let's go to the details, right? So as we discussed, there are certain problems that happen with, let me just get to the right sheet first. Just give me a second here. Okay, I'm still looking at receipts, so I'm getting to disbursement. Got it. So there are two problems that happen, right? So if you really want to know what is being spent on, say, health, and health is a part of the entire state budget, you want to look at health from capital and revenue together and bunch them up, right? So that's the first level of addition that one has to do in order to make sense of what is being spent on in an overall manner. Second is sometimes, say, for example, in government services, hang on, yeah. In government services, for example, you will get some numbers like other fiscal services. This other fiscal services can be something, you can have this thing called interest payments and servicing of debt, right? So basically in government parlance, debt or repayment of interest is also called a government service. So we can just pull that out and put that somewhere else. So what we have tried to do here, and this is, I think, the bubble chart that we had shared earlier from which was published by Live Mint. So what we have essentially done is to say that, you know, instead of saying government services, we've said government expenses, which is administration, interest payments, you know, pensions and miscellanea, right? So we've done a set of simplification, a new grouping to do this. This also includes the interest payments and so on from the capital side of expenditure, right? So you have to club both. And similarly, what you can do is in the social sector, you can remove human resource development and club labor and employment and education under it. You know, in social security, you can, you know, look at the various sort of group schemes, caste-based schemes, backward community, minority-based schemes that are there, and other schemes. You can look at health separately and so on. So again, I'm not spending too much time on this because this is something that you can quickly take a look. We'll be sharing this document offline on how do you map individual budget heads, major heads, club the revenue heads and the capital heads, and then map them in a manner that is simple. Because once this is done, right, this is genuinely and truly comparable across all states. And it also is the most meaning friendly way of looking at all the information, right? So that's what we have attempted to do here. So one is on the expenditure side, which is more complicated. The other is on the revenue side, where you want to look at taxes, central taxes, and what's not there in all the revenue, which is debt, which matches the rest of the expenditure that is being incurred. Okay. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say. Pranay, anything you want to add? Anything you want to intervene?
Yeah, Pawan, why don't you share the Mint piece that was written based on this just as an example, if you think.
We've shared it before. Maybe I'll just open it again.
Just show it to them.
Just hang on for a second, folks. I am hoping that you guys can see this.
Yeah.
There we go. Right. So this is what I think I had mentioned earlier. As a piece on, where does Karnataka get its money from and where does it spend it on. Now, unfortunately, I have no way to sort of automate the generation of this particular chart. This was done by the good folk at Mint, but I'm sure it can be visualized in different ways. And I think we've had Harish Garg and a few others try to do this kind of visualization on their own already. So my big recommendation for that is, instead of trying to visualize the state budget, where does money come from and where does it go, or directly, it's actually good to spend some time reclassifying it such that there is more meaning that you can extract, right? Because there are different types of income taxes. There is sales tax. Sometimes you can get lost in the details of road taxes and other minor taxes that don't really amount to much. Doing something like this, I think, gives a very quick way into what's the hierarchy of incomes and what is the hierarchy of expenditures and which one has most meaning. So that's pretty much it for the day. And I think this is the last tutorial. Everything else we can do sort of one-on-one or offline. We can just take a few questions and wrap up for the day.
Yeah. Pawan, there's one question. Krishna asks, when revised estimate is same as budgeted estimate, does it usually mean there is no updated data? So, can I answer that?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So, Krishna, what it essentially means is two things. Either they have calculated. So, a revised estimation exercise starts 6 months after you are into the current financial year. Okay. So after 6 months, they would either, there are two possibilities. One, that the expenditures that they had budgeted are on track. So that's why they can say that. Or the second possibility is that they haven't done any expenditure in the first 6 months, but they are saying that we'll do some lump sum expenditure in the coming 6 months and make up for the expenditure which was not incurred earlier. So it essentially means either of these two things.
Yeah, but I can add, right? So while it means either of the two, usually what the practice is, and this is at least how the practice is in the union government with the finance ministry and other ministries, one can hope that a similar relationship exists in all sort of states which are functioning robustly, is that the revised estimate process is usually done around October, November, right? So about 6 to 8 months of expenditure have been incurred and the tallies have been done. So basically what the finance department does is it goes to each other department or hauls them up and says, look, I allocated 5,000 crores to you guys. That's your budget. Tell me how much you've spent. Supposing they have spent, I don't know, 2,000 crores in about 9 months. So then what, or 8 months, then what is done is the assumption is made that that is the rate of expenditure per month, right? So when you look at all expenditure, the projected expenditure for the year, so that will be the proportional expenditure for the remaining 4 months. So if 8 months there is 2,000 crore expenditure, another 4 months at the same rate, it will be another 1,000 crores, right? So even though allocation was 5,000, the finance department might say automatically allocations now 3,000 crores in your revised estimate, right? And then it will ask the department, if you are saying that you will spend more than 3,000 crores, tell me why. And often departments can have very good reasons, because often expenditure can be lumpy, right? You may not be incurring something ahead of time, but maybe there's a new tender that's now you're about to issue or make the first payment on. So that kind of a back and forth should happen in a good state where the financial control is happening well. Otherwise, it might just be a formula or a rough estimate saying, oh, we can't spend too much, so here's a smaller number. So when the revised estimate doesn't change, it would probably mean that expenditure is on track. This is only confirmed if your actual expenditure that is given that is available the next year also adds up, right? But if revised estimate is on track versus revised estimate is under whatever cut down, that means that it is more likely that it is on track. I mean, we can definitely make that claim. But this was a very good question. I think it's important to get it. If revised estimate is increased, and it's usually increased on revenue items, there's a scheme, there's a subsidy. Sometimes it gets increased because they're undercounted and underestimated. The budget estimate process in various states can be very poor. So they might say, oh, in 2000 crores, we're going to, give people, we're going to do a midday meal scheme, we're going to go do some Antyodaya scheme and so on. But that scheme might actually be more expensive and you might have to up the game. So that's how I would read into the meaning of changes in revised estimate, expenditure versus, the budget estimate. Do we have any other questions, Pranay?
No, I think Anand had a few questions, but he's saying he's put it on the chat. I haven't got it from Pranav. So, nothing, no other questions apart from that.
Okay, so we'll check some of them offline, of course. So thanks, everyone. I know that this one was probably the most detailed and the most dry of the conversations we've had so far, but sort of hang in there. And we have about the next month for some really good analysis to come out. Once at least about 3-4 analysis pieces from one state comes out, we hope to have a view and do a live stream like this where we can actually talk about the state budget, look at the numbers, talk about the state, what each of you think the priorities are, and I think we can have a very vibrant conversation. Okay, so some of that will be starting in the coming week. So do stay tuned in and plugged in, whether or not you've had the time to, get a story out. Okay, so thank you everyone and have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.